Hi everybody, this lecture is going to deal with perception. We know that some parts of perception are hardwired. For instance, if you've ever seen an optical illusion, you can either see it one way or the other, like the old woman or the young woman, or the chalice or the two people's profiles. So if you think about that, we're kind of hardwired to see certain things. The rest of it's a process that we use. For instance, your book talks about attention, organization, and interpretation. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about those and introduce some new ideas. And then I'm also going to talk about how we remember what we have perceived and how we recall what we have memorized. So if you look at the attention stage of the perception process, your book talks about that we pay attention to our needs, to our interests, and to our expectations. And that's all true. But I want to talk to you about perceiving things or bringing to our attention because they are novel, they are intense, they are primary, or they are most recent. So we might pay attention to something because it meets our needs, or we might pay attention to something because it interests us, or maybe we pay attention because it's what we expect to see. But we also pay attention to things, or we select for attention those things that are novel. Novel just means new. So we perceive things or comes to our attention because it's new. If you imagine your head as a giant colander, remember colander is that thing that you use to strain spaghetti or maybe meat or something like that. And what you do is you pour all the noodles in the water into the colander, the water goes out, and what you're left with is the noodles. So what we're talking about when we talk about attention is what are the noodles that are left in our head. And so with novelty, what sticks in your head, the noodle, is whatever is new. So for instance, if you've never seen that store going in or that building being built, you might take a little longer just to kind of see what's going on there. We pay attention to it because it's something we've never seen before. If you're introduced to a new food that you've never tasted, then that might stick with you. Okay? We also pay attention to things or select for attention those things that are intense, those things that tick off more than one of our senses at the same time. For instance, a new smell or something that we can both smell and touch, or smell and taste, or seeing and hearing. So we might recall for attention a fire or a stop sign or something like that, caution tape. Those kinds of things sort of make us halt in our tracks and really take stock of what it is because it's intense. So if, for instance, we were in a class and right outside the class there was a giant fireball, we'd probably stop class just to pay attention to what that was because it's intense. It's also novel. The last two I want to talk about are mirror images of each other. We use or bring attention to those things that are both primary and most recent. Primary means what comes first. If you're given a list, you can probably remember what's first on the list or what's last on the list because those things are primary and most recent. So I usually do an experiment with my class. I give them 20 words on a slide that is set to advance in 20 seconds. And I tell them that they're going to need to remember as many of these as possible and that there's a prize for the person who remembers the most. 90% of my students remember the first word on the slide. It's because they knew they were going to have to remember it, so they spent more time on that first thing. About 65% of them remember what was last on the list because it was most recent, and then varying degrees of success on the other 18 words. So we remember things, or they're called to our attention, they're noodle, those things that meet our needs, spark our interests, will meet our expectations, but also because they're novel, they're intense, they're primary, or they're the most recent. Now, you've got the noodles in your head. What do you do with them? Well, now your head becomes something more like a filing system. So you've got file folders, and those noodles get put into the filing folders. It's probably going to make a mess. We organize what we've learned or what we have kept through attention by patterns. Sometimes these patterns are called schemas. So for instance, if I see an animal and it's got 4 legs and fur and cute perky ears, and it comes in and it pants while it sits beside me and then licks my hand when I reach down to pet it, I'm going to file that under dog, as most of you would. So that's the organization standpoint. We just use the information that we've gleaned and we put it into those file folders. Now, let's say that I go over to a friend's house and what I considered in the dog category that I'm petting and is licking my hand and panting and wagging its tail, let's say that my friend says, "Don't you think our parrot is awfully cute?" Well, I'm not going to think that that thing is a parrot. I'm going to be looking around for their parrot. But what if they indicate that they think that 4-legged creature is a parrot? How do I then interpret this new information? What doesn't fit the schema that I've created? So I can either add to the category about dog, and I can include, a parrot, or I can subtract from what I think of as a parrot, and now it's this thing too. Or I can just throw it out the window, or I can take the option where I think that this person that's giving me the new information is suspect, and I don't necessarily have to believe them. So interpretation is just fitting in what we know to the schemas that we have. Okay, what do you do with that outlying information? Now the stuff the book does not talk about at all, and that's memory and recall. Once we get this new information, once we've processed it or decided how it's going to fit into our schema, or maybe we had to create a new file folder in our heads for this new information, then we have to memorize it. We have to add it to the schema. We have to now be able to bring it back when we encounter another piece of this puzzle or another piece of information. The thing I want you to remember is that our memory, and thus our recall, is imperfect. We don't remember it the way it happened. We remember the way that it went through that perceptual process in our heads. So for example, if you've ever encountered a crime, like let's say that you were sitting in a cafe and a man ran by, grabbed a lady's purse, and kept on running. Well, the police come and they interview the people in the cafe that saw the incident. How many stories do they get? How many descriptions of the person or the suspect do they get? Probably as many as people are sitting in the cafe that they interviewed, because everybody has their own interpretation. Because everyone has procedurally processed this information. They've perceptually filtered the information that they saw. So they noticed different things based on what they expected to see, based on their interest, based on their needs. Then they organized it, and everybody's file folders are different because everyone's had different experiences. And then finally, they interpreted it differently. So remember that our memory and our recall is not reproductive. It's not like a Xerox machine just copying over and over the situation that we've seen. It's more reconstructive because it's been broken down, put into those different file folders, and interpreted separately. So that's perception in a nutshell. And if you have any questions, as always, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.